Jake thought he had struck gold when he met Emily. They were young and full of dreams, meeting at a campus cafe during their junior year at college. Emily had this way of laughing, a carefree melody that turned heads and made Jake feel like the luckiest man in the room. She was ambitious, studying marketing with the kind of drive that lit up her every conversation. Jake, on the other hand, was laid back but deeply loyal, pursuing computer science with dreams of landing a steady job and building a life together. For years, their love was the envy of everyone they knew. Weekend road trips, surprise date nights, and countless "I love yous" whispered in the dark wove their relationship into something Jake thought was unbreakable. They moved in together after graduation, sharing a cozy apartment in the city. Jake landed a decent job at a software firm, and Emily quickly rose through the ranks at an advertising agency. But over the past few months, things had shifted. Emily's once warm attention had grown cold. She worked late nights at the office more often, claiming her new promotion demanded extra hours. The excuses felt plausible enough, but Jake couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Their conversations felt clipped, their connection frayed. Then there were the unexplained texts, a recurring notification from a name Jake didn't recognize, Kyle. When Jake casually asked about it, Emily brushed him off with a quick laugh. "Oh, Kyle's just a guy from work," she said, but the flicker of nervousness in her voice stuck with him. Jake told himself not to overthink it. Emily was his girl. She'd never hurt him, right? Jake couldn't ignore the changes any longer. Emily had always been full of life, the type to wake up humming a song or sneak up behind him while he cooked breakfast. Lately, though, her mornings were silent. She barely touched her coffee before rushing out the door, leaving Jake with a kiss that felt more like a formality than affection. Even her laughter, the sound that had once lit up his world, seemed reserved for her phone. Jake would catch glimpses of it, her eyes fixed on the screen, fingers flying across the keyboard. "Work is crazy," she'd say, putting her phone down face first whenever he walked into the room. Jake started to notice patterns. The late nights at the office always fell on Fridays, and she began dressing with more care. Heels instead of her usual flats, bold lipstick in place of her everyday gloss. Once, she came home wearing a scarf she didn't leave with. When Jake asked about it, she laughed nervously. "A coworker lent it to me," she said, but offered no further explanation. That weekend, Jake was doing laundry when he found a receipt in Emily's coat pocket. It was for a dinner at a high-end restaurant across town, one they had never been to together. The receipt listed 2 entrees, a bottle of wine, and a dessert, items he knew Emily would never order alone. His chest tightened as he stared at the slip of paper, evidence of something he wasn't ready to face. Jake couldn't shake the feeling that the pieces weren't adding up. Emily was slipping away from him, and he didn't know how to pull her back. He confided in his best friend, Mike, during a quiet Saturday at their favorite bar. "She's just busy," Mike said, swirling his beer absent-mindedly. "Promotion means more responsibilities. You're probably overthinking it." Jake wanted to believe him. He wanted to write it all off as a coincidence, a misunderstanding. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and it was growing roots. That evening, as Emily worked on her laptop at the dining table, Jake hovered nearby, pretending to scroll through his phone. He glanced at her screen out of the corner of his eye. Her emails were open, and there it was again, Kyle. His name appeared several times in the subject lines of her emails, paired with emojis Jake hadn't seen Emily use before. "Emily," he asked casually, "do you talk to Kyle a lot at work?" Her fingers paused on the keyboard just for a second. She turned to him with a smile, the kind she used when she wanted to steer a conversation away. "Not really. He's just helping me with a project." Jake nodded, pretending to accept the answer, but inside, his doubts screamed louder. The breaking point came on a Friday night. Emily had another late meeting, and Jake was alone in their apartment, aimlessly flipping through channels. He had spent the week wrestling with his suspicions, torn between confronting her and hoping things would resolve themselves. At 9:30 p.m., Jake's phone buzzed. It was a text from an acquaintance he barely knew, Rachel, a friend of Emily's coworker. "Hey Jake, weird question. Is Emily out with someone tonight? My friend thought she saw her at the cellar with a guy. Figured you'd be there too." Jake stared at the message, his heart pounding. The cellar was a dimly lit wine bar Emily had mentioned once, saying it was too romantic for their usual outings. He texted back, "What did they see?" Rachel replied almost immediately, "Just her and a guy in a suit. They look close, but maybe it's work-related." Jake felt like the floor had fallen out from beneath him. He threw on a jacket and drove to the cellar, parking across the street and waiting in the shadows. It wasn't long before he saw them, Emily and Kyle. She laughed at something he said, her hand lingering on his arm. Jake clenched his fists, watching as they left together, walking toward a cab like a couple. Jake barely slept that night. His mind raced with the images of Emily and Kyle, the truth of her betrayal finally undeniable. The pain in his chest was overwhelming, but beneath it, anger simmered. How could she do this? After everything they'd built together, after all the promises? By morning, Jake knew one thing. He wasn't going to let her walk away without consequences. If Emily had been playing him, it was time for him to turn the tables. He spent the weekend laying the groundwork. He copied files from their shared computer, including financial statements, joint account details, and messages Emily had sent him over the years. He scrolled through her social media, noting every interaction with Kyle, likes, comments, and tags. Jake wasn't just hurt. He was calculating. When Emily returned home late Sunday night, smelling faintly of wine and Kyle's cologne, Jake greeted her with a smile. "How was the office?" he asked, his voice deceptively calm. "Exhausting," she said, heading straight for the shower. Jake watched her retreating figure, his expression hardening. This was just the beginning. Monday morning, Jake called in sick to work, though he felt anything but unwell. His mind was sharp, driven by a singular purpose. He began digging deeper into Emily's life, piecing together fragments of her betrayal. First, he revisited the receipt he found in her coat pocket. The restaurant was upscale and required reservations, which meant it likely had security cameras. Jake called, pretending to be from Emily's office, and asked if they could send over a receipt copy for expense reporting. The manager obliged, emailing him a receipt with Kyle's name listed alongside Emily's. Next, Jake went through their shared bank account. Emily's pattern of spending had shifted in recent months. Boutique purchases, spa treatments, and charges for high-end restaurants they'd never visited together lined the statements. Jake couldn't believe how blatantly she had used their joint finances to fund her secret life. But it was her phone records that confirmed everything. Jake logged into their shared mobile account and found a string of late-night calls and messages to Kyle, some lasting for hours. A particularly telling one had come just days after their anniversary, while Jake had been asleep, thinking their relationship was still intact. Each discovery felt like another stab to the heart, but it also fueled Jake's determination. Emily had shattered his trust, and now she was going to feel the weight of her actions. That evening, Jake set the stage. He prepared Emily's favorite dinner, chicken piccata with a side of garlic mashed potatoes, and lit candles in the dining room. When Emily walked through the door, she seemed startled by the effort. "What's all this?" she asked, dropping her bag by the door. "Just wanted to surprise you," Jake said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Emily hesitated, her face betraying a flicker of guilt before she masked it with a soft smile. "It's sweet. You didn't have to do all this." They ate in relative silence, Jake pretending to be engrossed in his food, while Emily occasionally glanced at her phone. Jake noticed her fingers tapping out a quick text when she thought he wasn't looking. "Long day at work?" Jake asked, his tone light. "Yeah," she replied quickly. "So many meetings." "Must be exhausting," Jake said. "You deserve a break." Her smile was tight, and Jake could see the cracks in her facade. But he didn't press her. Not yet. He needed her to stay comfortable, unaware of the storm that was brewing just beneath the surface. Over the next week, Jake began subtly unraveling Emily's world. He started with their finances. Without Emily noticing, he moved half the money from their joint savings account into his private one. He knew she wouldn't check. She had long ago left the boring stuff to him. Next, Jake scheduled a meeting with a divorce attorney. He laid out everything he had uncovered, the receipts, the phone records, and even screenshots of her social media interactions with Kyle. The attorney assured him that with this evidence, he'd have a strong case for protecting his assets. At home, Jake began dropping small hints to unsettle Emily. He casually mentioned how he'd run into Rachel at the grocery store and how Rachel had asked about you. Emily's face froze for a split second before she quickly recovered. "Oh, that's nice," she said, her tone forced. Jake let the conversation drop, but the seed had been planted. Emily grew more cautious, but her behavior only confirmed her guilt. The following Friday, Jake stayed home from work under the pretense of having a stomach bug. Emily, thinking she had nothing to worry about, left for another late meeting. Jake waited until she was gone before slipping out himself, following the route he knew she would take to Kyle's office. Sure enough, he spotted her car parked outside a hotel nearby. Jake's stomach churned as he watched her step out of the car, dressed in a sleek black dress he'd never seen before, and meet Kyle in the lobby. He snapped a photo from his car, his hand trembling as he captured the proof he needed. He wasn't just angry anymore. He was resolute. The next morning, Jake left early, leaving Emily a note saying he had errands to run. In truth, he was meeting with his attorney again, this time to finalize the legal framework of his plan. He also contacted their landlord, informing them that he'd be terminating the lease within 30 days. Emily had always assumed they'd renew it automatically, but Jake had other plans. That evening, when Emily returned home, Jake was calm, eerily so. He didn't ask where she'd been or question her excuses. Instead, he handed her a glass of wine and sat across from her on the couch. "I've been thinking," he said. "Maybe we should take a break." Emily looked startled. "A break? From what?" "From us," Jake said, his voice steady. "You've seemed distant lately, and I think we both need some space to figure things out." Emily stammered, caught off guard. "Jake, I mean, things have been fine, haven't they?" "Have they?" Jake asked, holding her gaze. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken truths. Emily's facade began to crumble. She tried to dismiss Jake's concerns, but her excuses grew weaker with each passing day. Meanwhile, Jake quietly continued dismantling the life they had built together. He packed his belongings into boxes while Emily was at work, carefully removing anything he had purchased or cared about. He arranged for the movers to come while Emily would be out of the apartment. When Emily found the empty closet a week later, Jake was gone. A single note was left behind on the counter. "Emily, I know everything. Don't call me." Emily stared at the note for what felt like hours, the words ringing in her head like a deafening alarm. "I know everything." She read it again, hoping she'd imagined it. Her hands trembled as she picked up her phone, dialing Jake's number, but it went straight to voicemail. "Jake, please call me. Let's talk," she said, her voice cracking. She left 3 more messages that evening, each more desperate than the last, but Jake didn't respond. Her heart raced as she tried to piece together how much he knew. Had Rachel said something? Had Jake seen something? She couldn't think straight. Over the next few days, Emily noticed more cracks in the foundation of her life. The landlord called to confirm the lease termination, a decision Jake had conveniently forgotten to tell her about. Their joint account was nearly empty, leaving Emily scrambling to pay bills with her credit card. She felt the walls closing in. Jake wasn't ignoring Emily's calls. He was planning his next move. He had rented a modest 1-bedroom apartment across town, far from where anyone would think to look for him. The apartment was small but clean, a blank slate where Jake could begin to rebuild his life. He worked methodically, setting up a new bank account and transferring his paycheck directly into it. He even spoke with their mutual friends, subtly seeding doubts about Emily without outright revealing her infidelity. "She's been acting a little strange lately," Jake said during a casual coffee with a couple they used to double date with. "I don't know if it's the stress of work or something else, but I hope she's okay." It wasn't long before whispers about Emily's behavior began circulating. Her carefully curated image of a hard-working, devoted partner began to erode, piece by piece. The climax of Jake's revenge came 2 weeks later at Emily's office holiday party, a night she had assured him she'd be too busy to attend with him, even before the fallout. Jake had no intention of staying home. With the help of a mutual friend who worked at Emily's company, Jake managed to get himself on the guest list. He arrived early, dressed sharply, blending seamlessly into the crowd of colleagues and clients. It wasn't long before Emily walked in, arm in arm with Kyle, laughing at something he whispered into her ear. Jake felt his chest tighten, but he kept his composure. Tonight wasn't about rage. It was about precision. As the night progressed, Jake mingled, making small talk with Emily's co-workers. The conversation inevitably turned to Emily and Kyle, and Jake's responses were deliberately vague. "Oh, Kyle?" Jake said when someone mentioned his name. "I've heard about him. Interesting guy." Later in the evening, as the lights dimmed and a slideshow of the company's year played on the projector, Jake made his move. The screen flickered, and instead of the usual team photos and event highlights, a new video began to play. It was a montage of text messages and photos, screenshots of Emily and Kyle's conversations, receipts from their secret dinners, and even a blurry photo of them leaving the hotel. The room fell silent. Whispers rippled through the crowd like wildfire. Emily's face went pale, her mouth opening and closing as she struggled to process what was happening. Jake stood at the back of the room, arms crossed, watching her unravel. When her panicked eyes met his, he gave her a small, mocking wave before walking out. Jake didn't wait around to see the full fallout. He knew Emily's reputation at work was ruined. An affair with a subordinate was a violation of company policy, and Kyle's position of power only made it worse. By the next morning, Emily's boss had placed her on suspension pending an investigation, while Kyle faced an immediate termination. As for Jake, he felt a strange mix of satisfaction and emptiness. The revenge had been thorough, calculated, and devastating, but it hadn't erased the pain of betrayal. He sat alone in his new apartment that night, a glass of whiskey in hand, staring out the window at the city lights. Emily tried to call him several times, leaving tearful voicemails. "Jake, please, I'm sorry. I don't know why I did it. Can we just talk? I'll do anything to fix this." But Jake didn't respond. He wasn't interested in fixing what she had destroyed. Instead, he focused on himself, hitting the gym, reconnecting with old friends, and throwing himself into his work. Slowly, the wounds began to heal. He even met someone new, a co-worker named Sarah, who seemed to radiate kindness and warmth. For Emily, the consequences lingered. The investigation at work led to her dismissal, and Kyle moved on to another city without so much as a goodbye. She tried to reach Jake one last time, showing up at his apartment unannounced. "Jake, I'm begging you," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I made a mistake, but I love you. Can we start over?" Jake looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he said, "You didn't just make a mistake, Emily. You made a choice, and now I've made mine." He closed the door, leaving her on the other side, a shadow of the woman he once loved. After Jake closed the door on Emily that night, he felt a strange combination of peace and sorrow. He had dreamed of a life with her, a home filled with love, kids laughing in the yard, lazy Sunday mornings spent cooking breakfast together. All of it was gone now, swept away by her betrayal. But as the days passed, Jake realized something. He wasn't sad about losing Emily. He was mourning the version of her he had loved, the person he thought she was. That version of Emily didn't exist anymore as she ever had. Meanwhile, Emily's world crumbled around her. She had lost her job, her reputation, and now Jake. Her friends began distancing themselves as word of her affair spread through social circles. Even Rachel, who had warned Jake, stopped returning her calls. Emily spent her days in their now-empty apartment, surrounded by reminders of the life she had destroyed. She scrolled through old photos of her and Jake, tears blurring her vision. She thought about writing him a letter, pouring out her heart, but every attempt ended in crumpled pages and frustration. One night, she sat alone with a bottle of wine, replaying the memories of their happiest moments. She remembered the way Jake had proposed on a rainy night, dropping to one knee in the middle of a muddy hiking trail because he couldn't wait any longer. She thought about how he used to leave sticky notes on her coffee mug, little love messages that always made her smile. She had taken it all for granted. Jake, on the other hand, was determined to move forward. He immersed himself in therapy, something he had never considered before. Talking to a professional helped him untangle the mess of emotions he felt. Anger, betrayal, but also a strange sense of guilt. Had he missed the signs? Could he have done something differently to save their relationship? His therapist reminded him that Emily's choices were her own. You can't control someone else's actions, she said gently. All you can do is decide how to respond. Jake took that advice to heart. He began journaling, writing down not only his pain, but also his hopes for the future. He rediscovered old hobbies, painting, hiking, and even picking up the guitar he hadn't touched in years. Slowly, he started to feel like himself again. Desperate for closure, Emily finally mustered the courage to write Jake a letter. She poured her heart onto the page, admitting to her mistakes and begging for forgiveness. She left it in his mailbox one rainy afternoon, then walked away, her heart pounding. Jake found the letter that evening, tucked between bills and junk mail. He read it twice, his emotions swirling. Emily had written about her insecurities, how she had felt lost and unworthy in their relationship. She claimed the affair wasn't about love, but about chasing something she thought was missing in herself. The letter ended with a plea. I don't expect you to take me back, Jake. I know I don't deserve it, but I hope, someday, you can forgive me. Jake folded the letter and set it aside. He didn't respond. Months later, Jake was walking through a local art gallery when he bumped into someone familiar. Sarah, the co-worker he had been getting to know. She was there with a group of friends, but her face lit up when she saw him. Jake, she said, her voice warm. I didn't know you were into art. Trying something new, he said with a smile. They spent the evening wandering the gallery together, talking about everything from their favorite childhood memories to their biggest dreams. Sarah's laughter was genuine, her curiosity infectious. For the first time in a long while, Jake felt hope stirring in his chest. Emily, meanwhile, had moved back to her hometown to stay with her parents. It was humiliating to return as a grown woman with her life in shambles, but she had no other choice. She found work as a waitress at a local diner, a far cry from her former career. The job was grueling, but it gave her plenty of time to think. She started volunteering at a local shelter on her days off, trying to find some sense of purpose. One evening, as she cleaned tables after a long shift, she overheard two regulars talking about relationships. Trust is everything, one of them said. Once it's broken, it's almost impossible to get back. Emily's chest tightened. She thought about Jake, about the trust she had shattered, and wondered if she'd ever truly understand why she had done it. Jake and Sarah began spending more time together, though he was careful to take things slow. He told her about his past, about Emily, and the pain he had endured. Sarah listened without judgment, her empathy a balm for his wounds. One evening, as they sat on a park bench watching the sunset, Sarah reached for his hand. You deserve happiness, Jake, she said softly. Don't let what she did keep you from finding it. Jake squeezed her hand, a small smile breaking through. I think I'm starting to believe that. A year after the breakup, Emily made one final attempt to reach out to Jake. She sent him a short message. Thank you for the time we had. I've been working on myself, and I'm finally starting to understand who I am. I hope you found happiness. You deserve it. Jake read the message and felt a strange sense of peace. He didn't reply, but he hoped Emily truly meant it. Jake eventually sold the painting he had been working on, a landscape inspired by the hiking trail where he had proposed to Emily. It felt like a fitting way to close that chapter of his life. Sarah, now his girlfriend, encouraged him to pursue more creative projects. Together, they planned a trip to the mountains, a place Jake had always loved but hadn't visited in years. As they stood at the summit, looking out over the rolling hills, Jake felt something he hadn't in a long time: contentment. Jake's life felt lighter with Sarah in it. She brought out a part of him he hadn't realized he'd buried, his adventurous, spontaneous side. On a whim, they started taking weekend trips to small towns and scenic trails, reconnecting with the world outside their daily routines. During one of their hikes, Jake told Sarah about his dream of opening an art studio. It had been a fleeting thought years ago, something he'd tucked away when his career in software began to dominate his life. You should do it, Sarah said, her eyes lighting up. You're so talented. I can already see the gallery opening night. You, standing there with your work on display, proud as hell. Jake laughed, brushing it off at first, but Sarah's belief in him stayed with him. He began painting more seriously, experimenting with styles and techniques late into the night. Emily's life in her hometown was far from glamorous, but it was transformative. She started attending therapy, driven by a deep desire to understand herself and her choices. In one session, her therapist asked, "What were you running from, Emily?" The question caught her off guard. She had been focused on the damage she'd caused, but she hadn't stopped to think about the emptiness she had felt inside, the void she had tried to fill with Kyle, and the thrill of her affair. "I think I was scared of being ordinary," she admitted, her voice trembling. "Jake was so stable, so steady. I thought I needed something more, but now I realize I was running from myself." Her therapist nodded, encouraging her to keep digging deeper. Each session peeled back another layer of her past, helping Emily confront the insecurities that had driven her to sabotage her own happiness. Months later, Emily ran into Rachel at a coffee shop. She hesitated, unsure if Rachel would even acknowledge her. But to her surprise, Rachel waved her over. "I heard you've been back for a while," Rachel said, her tone neutral. "Yeah," Emily replied, sitting down cautiously. "Things didn't exactly go as planned." Rachel studied her for a moment before leaning forward. "You know, I was angry with you for a long time. What you did to Jake wasn't just wrong, it was cruel. But I also think you've paid the price for it." Emily nodded, tears stinging her eyes. "I have, and I'm trying to be better. I wish I could undo it all." Rachel softened. "You can't undo it, Emily, but you can keep moving forward. Maybe that's enough." Their conversation marked the beginning of a tentative friendship. Emily wasn't sure if she deserved it, but she was grateful for the chance to connect with someone again. A year after their first hike together, Jake and Sarah stood outside the art studio Jake had just opened. The space was small but inviting, with bright walls and rows of his work displayed under warm lighting. Friends and family had gathered for the opening, filling the room with laughter and admiration. Jake felt a swell of pride as people complimented his pieces, and Sarah beamed by his side, offering words of encouragement to every visitor. Toward the end of the evening, Jake spotted a familiar face lingering near the door, his old friend Mike. "I didn't think you'd come," Jake said, shaking Mike's hand. "Are you kidding?" "I had to see this," Mike replied. He paused, then added, "You've come a long way, Jake. I'm proud of you." Jake nodded, his throat tightening with emotion. For the first time in years, he felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. Back in her hometown, Emily had finally found a sense of purpose. She had started organizing community events at the shelter where she volunteered, using her marketing skills to draw attention to their cause. Her efforts didn't go unnoticed. A local nonprofit offered her a job as their outreach coordinator, a role that combined her professional expertise with her newfound desire to help others. The work was challenging, but it gave Emily a sense of fulfillment she hadn't felt in years. She wasn't chasing the next thrill anymore. She was building something meaningful. One crisp autumn morning, Jake received an email from Emily. He hesitated before opening it, unsure if he wanted to dredge up the past. "Ijeka, I hope this message finds you well. I wanted to let you know that I've started a new chapter in my life, one where I'm finally learning to be honest with myself and others. Thank you for being part of my journey, even if I didn't deserve your kindness or love. I wish you nothing but happiness. Take care, Emily **. Jake read the email twice, then closed his laptop. He felt no anger, no sadness, just a quiet sense of closure. Emily was a chapter he had finished, and he was ready to move on. Jake and Sarah stood on the deck of a small cabin they had rented for the weekend, watching the sun set over a tranquil lake. Jake held Sarah's hand, her warmth grounding him in the present. "Do you ever think about what could have been?" Sarah asked, her tone curious. Jake thought for a moment, then shook his head. "Not anymore. I've got everything I need right here." As the sky turned shades of orange and pink, Jake felt a sense of peace he hadn't thought possible. The pain of the past had shaped him, but it no longer defined him. He had chosen to embrace the future, and it was beautiful. Thank you for watching the video. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss interesting life stories, and write a comment if you like the story. See you.